Hey everybody, Josh Searton, World Alternative Media here, and of course I'm joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and what we've been warning about for so long is coming true. It's not a conspiracy theory anymore. The implementation of the SDR is nigh, and with this article that we're focusing on out of Reuters, the title says, UN calls for global economic makeover to replace neoliberalism. And in short, the article kind of goes into the world must ditch austerity and economic neoliberalism and undertake a global New Deal to rebalance the global economy and achieve prosperity for all, the UN Trade and Development Agency said in a report on Thursday. And of course, we recognize that term, the New Deal, from FDR in the 1930s, and it turned out to be one of the biggest disasters of all time, coming from a governmental level on the markets and the economy. Now, moving forward, the chief, Mukisa Kituyi, said the global economy was picking up but still not lifting off. A combination of too much debt and too little demand at the global level has hampered sustained expansion of the world economy, he said in a statement. And scrolling down a bit on the article here, he mentioned, we need a global New Deal, he said, referring to the policies that quote-unquote revived the depressed U.S. economy in the 1930s. No, it didn't. I think the war did, and that was the whole point, I think, in the long term. But anyway, it goes on to say, the aim should be to end fiscal austerity imposed in 13 out of 14 leading advanced economies between 2011 and 2015 and prioritize reflation, full employment, and decent jobs rather than tackling inflation and cutting government debt. And he says, in quotes, it needs a serious regulation of corporate abuse in both the financial and the corporate sector, and it requires serious redistributionary measures, both fiscal and more innovative measures, he said. And of course, he's pushing forward that collectivist mantra, that socialist mantra that we talk about so often. And it's just, he goes into, how the world has been overrun by, big corporations, etc., 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 and then goes on to say, well, we want to put in more regulations and do more redistributionary measures that in the end have actually grown the size and scope of these monopolies he speaks of. It's mindless and ridiculous, but the global order is on our doorsteps and it's coming in our door, and we have to do something fast. John, what do you think about this?
What I think about it, it's quite easy. This is, of course, what we've been talking about for a while here at WAM. We've been talking about the implementation of the special drawings and the United Nations shadow government, if you can call it shadow global government. We've gone into great detail about the many tentacles of globalism and
good video. We went through every bit of the United Nations and how they manipulate the world.
Yeah, there's a whole wide array. Like, the United Nations is ready to take over at any time. Now, going back to this New Deal, well, first of all, the New Deal, the reason why you actually got the big burst as well, Josh, not just the war, was because he confiscated a lot of gold
and funded the Exchange Stabilization Fund and the IMF.
Yeah, exactly. And then he actually, what he did with the New Deal, he also, fractionalized the dollar more, so the dollar got way less worth. And then, of course, what happened was that they could print a whole bunch of more fake US dollars into the system, and then of course that new amount of dollars and new amount of debt that came into the system really was helping the economy. I'm saying asterisks.
It's temporary because Keynesianism is only meant to work for temporary purposes.
When it comes to big debt bursts in economic history, you have China in 1024. They engulfed on the same kind of track where they over-indebted themselves. So everybody does this in the fiat currency system. They have to go kind of fiat first before they can really pump up the debt in a massive amount.
1,000 years later, and here we are. And I wanted to quickly mention something about FDR seizing the gold in 1933. What that really did was he took that and put it into the Exchange Stabilization Fund. He later put that into the IMF. It was used to fund the IMF, the same gold that was seized. Yeah. And people might say, well, how did he print a bunch of dollars when there was a gold standard? Look, the problem isn't strictly fiat currency. It's central planning. So fiat currency is created via central planning. the gold standard, they printed way more IOUs than they had gold in reserves. So that created vast amounts of debt as well, and that caused a huge problem. While
And
it
they
didn't
had to
cause
pay
anywhere,
their debt,
yeah,
right? So they had to print more, and then they had to fractionalize it more. And eventually, in '71, of course, Nixon had to go off the gold standard because the whole system had fallen down in 1971.
and they did something very similar in Canada. Yeah. They did something very similar under Trudeau a couple years later in Canada.
They went to borrow from the private banks instead of borrowing from the people's own bank, the central bank here in Canada, Bank of Canada.
And enforced under legal tender laws, which are a scourge on mankind because they stop people from being able to decide what they trade and actually be able to get out of the debt enslavement of the central banking system and the government, which works hand in hand to drive people into debt.
Well, if you see all these people that are part of the UN, and especially on the economic side, that's what I really follow very heavily. A lot of the big names like Lagarde, Mario Draghi, all these people that are on a big grand scale, the central bankers. What they want is cashless society implemented so they could have their negative interest rates and then save the economy that way. Which they basically are
save themselves while we drink water out of puddles and curbs.
You're literally forced to put your money into the bank through the cashless system, and then it used to be you borrow the money to the bank, and then the bank goes and wastes your money and loses it. But now it wastes and loses it, but you actually have to pay them for them to waste and lose it.
Should I go through my spiel, John?
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, well, as I often say here at WHAM, if your money's in the bank, it's not yours, it's the bank's. And if your money is always going through the banks, through digital transactions, legal tender laws, central planning, it's never your money, it's always in the bank, it's never in your hands, and you are essentially enslaved to the banks. You don't own your money. The money goes through the banking system from your job. You never hold it in your hands. You never are able to own it because it's always in the bank's coffers. And that puts you perfectly in a situation where you are on your knees to the banking system and the government. You have to beg the government for your own money, which you are only allowed to use through transactions through the banking system, and it's all digital. And also, you are tracked everywhere you go. So everything that you spend money on, they know about it. No free market left. And this is why people are flooding, not only just because there's a crash in the stock market coming and a crash in the monetary system, but because of the vast decimation of privacy. People are flooding their money into gold, flooding their money into silver, flooding their money into Bitcoin, which is a decentralized cryptocurrency on the blockchain, which is not centrally planned and not controlled by the banking system. Therefore, you can get off that grid. And I know a lot of people find that funny because I say off the grid and it's literally digital, but you can put it in paper wallets, you can put it on USBs, and it's decentralized, folks. People too often mix up what centralization is and decentralization is. They don't understand the vast difference. It's polar opposites. And people think, well, the cashless system and the SDR, which is being pushed forward by China, India, through their retina scans, etc., Australia through facial recognition and cash, and Sweden as well, including Canada and the United States. People don't realize that is not the same system as a cryptocurrency, which is decentralized and not controlled by the hand of man, except for via the hand of demand, which is freedom, folks. Demand is freedom. You vote with your dollar, not get extorted and forced into a certain kind of system by an all-powerful state and banking system. And I think that people have to understand the differences because the differences are extremely clear. It's basic, it's made complicated on purpose, but it really truly is basic. John?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this whole New Deal is going to have nothing to do with the general well, actually, it's going to really destroy the value of our currencies, because what's going to happen is the SDR is going to be the big overreaching global currency for trade between countries and big multinational corporations. If you don't believe me, go and read the own documents that United Nations and IMF has put out on this. And then they're going to, of course, do what they did with the euro at the time. We just spoke about it in a recent video, where they severely devalue the local currency, the US dollar, versus the actual new value of the new US dollar, or whatever it's going to be. and then suddenly you're sitting, you lost maybe 30 to 80% of the value of what you had saved up for your lifetime. Well, first of all, this new deal, what's going to happen, I believe, is asset freezes worldwide, bail-ins all over the place. And suddenly you're going to see like, oh, all the money that I saved up all my life is going to be eviscerated and suddenly disappear.
Because they're dependent on the banking system and the government.
Yeah, and it wasn't protected through the fiat value. The fiat value basically is worthless.
Which is why it comes down to financial responsibility, folks. Now, this would be much worse than the euro. This would be much worse than the Amero that people were worried about many years before. However, there is solutions, and a lot of people say, and in some ways I agree with them, that it won't happen strictly because the whole banking system is coming crashing down right now. They are in desperation mode. That's why they're trying to push this forward as soon as possible, because the sooner they get this implemented, the sooner they can have their world order. And their world order does not look so good right now. Not because of politicians, not because of Trump, not because of Nigel Farage, but because the system itself, by its own decree, is crumbling at its foundation. And you look at the banking system the central banking system in the United States, for example, the world reserve currency, and people are swapping for other currencies around the world because they want nothing to do with the US dollar. They're trying to escape that at all costs. There's a huge power shift going towards China, which of course is also dangerous, very dangerous, because that's how it goes into the SDR in the first place, because of course the IMF was talking about even moving to Beijing in the next few years. That's how much that power shift is taking place. But I have to say, though, that if that dollar crashes because they're trying to raise interest rates enough to drop them out so that they can, make up for the vast decimation of the monetary system, it won't work because it's going to go negative. And what's going to happen next? There's going to be chaos in the streets. There's going to be vast amounts of inflation, like we saw in the Weimar Republic, like we see in Venezuela right now. And they don't want that to happen because that means their system's going down. There's one way that they want that to happen because it puts everyone in servitude. But they'd rather people be in servitude to like the SDR world currency and have faith in this monstrosity of what was once considered currency. It's no longer your mom and pop gold and silver coins. This is a very dangerous implementation on a global basis of digital currency, which will put you in debt servitude, because if they shove you down a bottomless pit of debt, you are forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, and that puts you in perfect servitude on your knees to them. So they are trying to save that system by pulling it into the SDR at the last second, and people are not buying it yet. They thought people would have already bought it by now. I mean, there's that old The Economist, the magazine back in the 80s, was putting forward that magazine cover with
take a look at it here.
The eagle, I believe it was, and it's carrying the SDR 2018. But
that was from the 60s.
Well, it was from the 1980s.
Oh,
but
sorry, 80s, yeah.
But just looking at how, even with Agenda 21 at the United Nations years ago, they thought they would have had their way by now. But people are more resilient than they thought, and we have to be even more resilient as they step up their game and get even crazier and not even try to hide it anymore. Because it used to be a big conspiracy theory and nonsense, just some crazy guy with a tinfoil hat.
Conspiracy
but
theory.
It's right here.
Yeah.
It's right in front of us. Are you going to do something about it? Or are you going to continue calling us, those crazy morons? This affects you. It affects everyone on this planet. You can believe it or not. You don't believe it? Well, suffer the consequences. Don't be prepared. You want to be overly prepared? Well, that's a good thing. It's better to be overly prepared than underprepared in the long term. Just look at history.
Well, if you want to know what's going to happen here with this United Nations move that they're talking about, the UNCTAD, I highly suggest you read my book, Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World, because a part of the book actually talks about what is coming. So especially with the United Nations, I go in great detail on their plans and what they've put in place, and I give you links so you can actually take a look at these documents yourself and see what's going on. Because there's one thing me saying it, but if you can actually go and look it up online, so that's definitely a book that you have to take a look at if you want to understand what this New Deal is all about that they're talking about here.
Absolutely. And this was a plan all along. You can find that book on Amazon.com. We will leave a link as per usual. But we're going to finish it off right now. John, what do you think is the bottom line?
Well, the bottom line here is they want this new world order in place as soon as possible. We need to, stick whatever things we can in the wheels here and stop this dead, because if we don't, we all know what's coming. The United Nations believe in communism, so I believe we should definitely start working hard against this, and this whole United Nations machine that have been built, it's everywhere. Take a look at whatever policies is in your local government. It's everywhere. So,
everywhere.
Yeah, you need to really resist this United Nations takeover, because what they want is they want a full totalitarian government. They say it's for peace, but of course, any government that have that amount of power is always going to misuse it.
Absolutely. Even in Bozeman, Montana recently, there was the watershed nonsense that we're seeing pop up around the area in a place that's so individualist and independent. Even there, you can find the United Nations. There's nowhere that you can go without seeing the decimation of policy in a way in order to push us into debt enslavement and push us into fear, which also puts us into complete servitude. There's nowhere you can go where you won't find it, and it's so important to stand up against that, because of course with just a central banking system alone, that's one of the planks in the Communist Manifesto. So it's time that we stand up against this and stop being apologists for this system, stop being apathetic to this system, because they say they came for the Jews, they came for the Muslims, blah 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 blah, and then when they came for me, there's no one left to stand up for me. Well, we should all stand up for all of us should stand up for ourselves, because this affects every one of us, no matter what race, gender, ethnicity, religion, no matter what you are, you will be affected by it, and it's time that we take a stand. So thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for going into this with us, John, and until next time, this is Josh Searton and John Snyson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.